A Search in Secret India, Chapter 12, Written in the Stars. The cupolas quiver with light in the dazzling sunshine. The bathers fill the air with the sounds of their matutinal ablution, and the jumbled oriental pageant of the waterfront at Benares shows itself anew to my alien gaze. I idle down the Ganges in a heavy junk whose prow is carved like a cobra's head. I sit on the roof of a cabin while the 3 rowers who are below pull their quaint oars. A merchant from Bombay is my companion, and, as he sits next to me, he tells me that he intends to retire from trade when he returns to that city. He is an extremely pious but equally practical man. While laying up treasure in heaven, he is not omitted to lay up treasure in the bank. I have known him for about a week and find him an amiable, genial and friendly person. "I am retiring in the very age which Sudhai Babu predicted it would happen," he says, eager to explain. This odd remark causes me, metaphorically, to prick my ears. Sudhai Babu? Who is he? Do you not know? He is the cleverest astrologer in Benares. Oh, just an astrologer, I grunt back a little scornfully. For I have seen the breed squatting in the dust of Bombay's great open space, the Maidan sitting in solitary booths at Calcutta, and foregathering wherever travellers pass through every little town I have visited. Most of them are dirty-looking creatures with wild locks of unkempt hair. The recognizable print of superstition and ignorance rests upon their faces. Their stock in trade usually consists of 2 or 3 greasy, well-fingered books and some vernacular almanac filled with incomprehensible signs. I have often cynically thought of their eagerness to direct the fortunes of other persons when they themselves seemed outside the pale of good fortune. "I am somewhat surprised at you. Is it safe for a businessman to trust himself to the twinkling of the stars? Don't you think common sense is a better guide?" I add, in the tone of one giving good advice. The other man half shakes his head and smiles tolerantly at me. "How, then, do you explain the prediction of my retirement? Who could have guessed that I would give up trade at such an exceptionally early age, for as you know, I am only a year past 40? Coincidence, perhaps? Very well. Let me tell you a little story. Some years ago, I met a great astrologer in Lahore and started a large business negotiation on his advice. At that time, I was in partnership with an older man. My partner asserted that the affair was far too risky and he refused to agree with me. Because he would not enter into the transaction, we dissolved partnership. I carried the business through alone. It was a startling success and brought me a small fortune. Yet, unless the Lahore astrologer had strongly supported me, I too would have fared to enter into the affair. Then you hold the opinion that? My companion finishes the sentence for me. Our lives are ruled by destiny, and that destiny is shown by the positions of the stars. I slip my objections to his statement upon the thread of an impatient gesture. The astrologers I have seen in India are such an illiterate, stupid-looking lot that I cannot imagine what beneficial advice they can give anyone. Ah, you must not confuse a learned scholar like Sudhai Babu with those ignorant men you have encountered. Truly, those men are charlatans, but he is a highly intelligent Brahmin who lives in a large house of his own. He has made a deep study of the subject for many years and possesses many volumes of great rarity. It suddenly occurs to me that my companion is no fool. He belongs to that type of modern Hindu who is enthusiastically practical and who does not hesitate to avail himself of the latest resources or Western invention. He is even ahead of me in some ways. He carries a magnificent moving picture camera on the boat, whereas I can boast of nothing better than a humble pocket Kodak. His servant produces a thermos flask and pours out a cooling drink, thus rebuking my lamentable forgetfulness of an excellent travelling requisite. And I know from his talk that he makes most use of the telephone when in Bombay than I have ever cared to do when in Europe. And yet he believes in astrology. I puzzle over the incongruous elements which compose his character. Let us understand each other. You fully accept the theory that every man's career and every worldly event is controlled by stars whose distance from our planet is so great that it beggars imagination? Yes, I do, he answers quietly. I shrug my shoulders, not knowing what to say. He assumes an apologetic air. My dear sir, why not go and try him for yourself? You say in your country, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Find out what Sudhir Babu can discover about you. I have no use for the cheap charlatans myself, but I believe in that man's genuineness. I'm skeptical about those who make a business of foretelling. Still, I shall take you at your word. Will you take me to this astrologer? Certainly. Come and have tiffin with me tomorrow, and then we shall visit him. We continue to float by broad palaces and old temples and little shrines bespattered with yellow flowers. I look indifferently at the broad stone steps crowded with bathing pilgrims and reflect that, though science rightly flatters itself with having put a check to superstition, I have yet to learn that a scientific attitude should put a check to investigation. If my companion can produce some evidential facts for the marked feeling of fatalism which he shares in common with most of his countrymen, I shall study them with an open mind. The next day my amiable acquaintance brings me to a narrow archaic street which runs through a heap of flat-topped houses. We stop before a rambling old stone-built structure. He leads the way through a dark, low-roofed passage, and then we climb several stone steps which are no wider than a man's body. We pass through a narrow room and find ourselves on the veranda of a spacious inner courtyard, around which the house has been built. A chained dog sights us and furiously barks a challenge. An array of large pots, each holding some tropical flowerless plant, spreads along the veranda. I follow my companion into a dark, frowning room and nearly fall over some broken flagstones at the threshold. As I stoop, I notice that loose earth lies sprinkled in the room as freely as it is sprinkled on the veranda floor. Does the astrologer find relief from his starry studies in plant growing? I wonder. The other man shouts for the astrologer, whose name is echoed back to us by the ancient walls. We wait for 2 or 3 minutes and assist the dog by further calls for the astrologer to punctuate the silence of this seemingly deserted building. I begin to think that we have come on a fruitless errand when the sound of someone stirring descends from an upper floor. Soon after I hear shuffling steps approach our room. The figure of a slight man, carrying a candle in one hand and jangling a bunch of keys in the other, appears on the threshold. There follows a brief conversation in the semi-gloom, and the astrologer unlocks another door through which we all pass. He draws aside 2 heavy curtains and opens the shutters which cover tall balcony windows. The astrologer's face is suddenly illuminated by the light which falls through the opened windows. I see a man who seems more like a figure from the ghost world than one of flesh and blood. Never before have I seen anyone so sicklied over the pale cast of thought. His death-like countenance, incredibly lean body, and unearthly slow movements combine to produce a weird effect. The whites of his eyes are so pronounced as to heighten this impression, their whiteness offering a strong contrast to the jet black pupils. He takes his seat at a large table whose surface is littered with papers. I discover that he speaks tolerably good English, yet it is only after some persuasion that I can induce him to carry on a direct conversation without the aid of a third party as interpreter. Please understand that I come as an inquirer, not as a believer. I begin. He nods his thin head. Yes, I shall cast your horoscope, and then you must tell me if you are satisfied. What is your fee? I have no fixed charge. Some people of good position pay me 60 rupees. Others pay me 20 rupees. I leave the amount to you. I proceed to make it clear to him that before we bother about the future, I want to test his knowledge of the past. He agrees. For a while he busies himself with calculations over my birth date. After 10 minutes, he stoops to the floor behind his chair and searches among a disorderly pile of yellowed papers and palm leaf manuscripts. Finally, he draws out a little bundle of oblong, time-stained slips. He sketches a queer diagram on a sheet of paper and says, "This is a chart of the heavens at the time you were born. And these Sanskrit texts explain the meaning of every part of the chart. Now I shall tell you what the stars declare." He scrutinizes the diagram with minute care, refers to one of his slips, and speaks again in that low, emotionless voice which befits his personality so well. "You are a writer from the West, am I correct?" I nod in agreement. He tells me thereafter about my youth and describes in great, quick succession a few happenings of the earlier years of my life. In all, he gives me 7 important points about my past. 5 of them are broadly correct, but the other 2 are utterly wrong. Thus, I am able to check up on the value or worthlessness of his powers. The honesty of the man is transparent. I am already convinced that he is incapable of deliberate deception. A 75% success in an initial test is startling enough to show that Hindu astrology calls for investigation, but it also indicates that the latter is no precise, infallible science. Once again, Sudhir Babu burrows among his scattered papers and then describes my character with a fair degree of accuracy. After that, he pictures the mental capacities which have brought me to follow a profession congenial to them. Here again, when he lifts his intellectual head and asks, "Have I read correctly?" I cannot dispute his words. He shuffles his papers, silently studies the diagram, and begins to speak of the future. "The world will become your home. You shall travel far and wide, yet always you will carry a pen and do your writing work." And in this strain he discourses of what is yet to be. But I can run no investigating rule over his prophecies, so I am content to leave them where I find them, written in the stars. With his last words, he again asks if I am satisfied. His fairly correct description of my past 40 years on this amazing planet, his almost completely successful effort to show me my mental state, these things silence the criticisms which I have come prepared to utter. I want to ask myself, is this man merely drawing a bow at a venture? Is he doing nothing more than a bit of smart guesswork? But I must candidly confess that his prognostications impress me, yet time alone can tell whether there is any worth in them or not. Is my Western attitude towards the dark question of fate to tumble about me like a house of thin cards? What can I say about the matter? I move over to the window and stand there, staring out at the opposite house and jingling the silver rupees in my pocket. Finally, I return to my seat and question the astrologer. "Why should it seem impossible to you that such distant stars can influence the lives of men?" he rejoins softly. "Do not the tides respond to the distant moon in their ebb and flow? Does not the body of a woman undergo a change every lunar month? Does not the absence of the sun make men more liable to depressed moods?" Quite so. But that is a far cry from asserting the claims of astrology. Why should Jupiter or Mars care 2 annas whether I meet with shipwreck or not? He looks at me with an unruffled face. It is better that you regard the planets as being only symbols which stand in the sky. It is not that they which really influence us, but our own past, he replies. You will never understand the reasonable nature of astrology unless you accept the doctrine that man is born again and again and that his fate follows him with every birth. If he escapes the results of his evil actions in one birth, they will punish him in his next. And if he does not receive a due reward for his good actions in one lifetime, he will surely receive it in the next. Without this doctrine of the continued return of man's soul to this earth until such time as it becomes perfect, the changing fortunes of different persons would seem the result of mere chance or blind luck. How can that be allowed by a just deity? No, it is our belief that when a man dies, his character, desires, thoughts, and will continue to exist until they enter a body of flesh once more and come among us in the form of a newborn baby. The good or evil actions committed in the former birth will be suitably rewarded or punished in the present or even future births. This is how we explain fate. When I said that you would be shipwrecked one day and in grave danger of drowning, that is the fit destiny which God, in His hidden justice, has portioned out to you because of something wrong which you did in a former birth. It is not the planets which force you into shipwreck, but the inescapable results of your former actions. The planets and their positions only act as a record of this destiny. Why they should do so, I cannot say. No man's brain could ever have invented astrology. It came to us from long ago, when it was revealed for man's benefit by the great seers of ancient times. As I listened to this plausible pronouncement, I hardly know what comment to make. He would bind one's soul and fortune to the sake of fate, but no healthy Westerner would let himself be despoiled of the prized possession of free will. What inhabitant of the energetic Occident can wax enthusiastic over this belief that it is destiny and not choice which directs him to take his steps? I gaze in bewilderment at this lean dreamer, this sallow wanderer through remote signs of the zodiac. Do you know, I tell him, that in some parts of the South the astrologers rank next to the priests, and that nothing of any magnitude can be done without previously consulting them? We Europeans would laugh at such a position, for we do not look kindly upon predictive methods. We like to think that we are free individuals and not the hapless victims of an inexorable destiny. The astrologer shrugs his shoulders. In one of our old books, the Hitopadesha, it is declared, no one is capable of opposing the predestinations of fate which are written on the foreheads of men. He lets his words sink in. Then he continues, what can you do? We must bear with the fruit of our actions. But I am dubious about this statement and express my feelings. The prophet of personal fortunes rises from his chair. I take the hint and prepare to leave him. He murmurs musingly, all is in the power of God. Nothing can escape him. Who of us is really free? Whither can we go where God is not? At the door he adds hesitatingly, if you wish to come again, we may talk further on these matters. I thank him and accept the invitation. Very well. I shall expect you tomorrow after the sun has gone down, about the hour of 6. Next day, I return with the dust to the astrologer's house. I have no intention of accepting all that he tells me, but neither have I formed any plans for rejection. I come to listen, possibly to learn, though the latter rests on how far his statements can be verified by experiment. And at this time I am ready enough to make experiments, but only if sufficiently strong reasons can be given for them. Yet, Sudais Babu reading of my horoscope has stirred me to the perception that Hindu astrology is not superstitious nonsense, and that it may well warrant a deeper investigation. That thought represents the limit of my present attitude. We sit facing each other at his large writing table. A paraffin lamp throws a dim light upon the scene. Millions of other Indian homes are being lit tonight in the same way. I have 14 rooms in this house, the astrologer tells me. They are filled with ancient manuscripts, which are mostly written in Sanskrit. That explains why I need such a large house, although I live alone. Come and see my collection. He removes the hanging lamp and leads the way into another room. Open boxes are ranged around the walls. I peer inside one of them and find it full of books and papers. Even the floor of the room is hidden under a multitude of papers, bundles of palm leaf manuscripts, and books whose covers are discolored with age. I take a small bundle in my hand. Each leaf is covered with incomprehensible faded characters. We go from room to room and find the same scene everywhere. The astrologer's library appears to be in a state of hopeless disorder, but he assures me that he is familiar with the whereabouts of every book and paper. It seems to me that his house has gathered the wisdom of Hindustan. Surely, much of the large, strange lores of India is contained in the almost undecipherable pages of these ancient rolls of manuscript and in these Sanskrit books. We return to our chairs, and the other man informs me. Nearly all my money has been spent in buying these manuscripts and books. Many of them are very rare and cost me large sums. So, it is that I am very poor today. What subjects do they deal with? They deal with human life and divine mysteries, while many are concerned with astrology. Then you are also a philosopher. His thin mouth relaxes into a half smile. A man who is not a good philosopher will make a poor astrologer. If you will pardon me for saying so, I hope you do not overstudy all those books. I was shocked at your pallor when I first met you. That is not surprising, he replies calmly. I have not eaten for 6 days. I express my concern. It is not a question of money. The woman who comes every day to cook for me is away ill. She has been away for 6 days. Then why not call in another woman? He shakes his head firmly. No, my food must not be cooked by a lower caste woman. I would rather not eat for a month than permit that to happen. I must wait till my servant's health is restored. But I expect her to return in a day or two. I peer at him intently and notice that he wears the sacred thread of the sons of Brahma. The triple cord of woven linen which nestles under his chin is placed around the neck of every Brahman baby and is never to be removed till death. So, he is a Brahman. Why trouble yourself with a superstitious caste restriction? I urge. Surely your health is more important than that. It is not superstition. Everyone gives out a magnetic influence which is quite real, even though the instruments of your Western science have not yet discovered it. The cook who prepares food throws the influence into it unconsciously, of course. A cook of low character will thus taint the food with bad magnetism, which passes into the person who eats the food. What a strange theory! But it is true. I change the subject. How long have you been an astrologer? For 19 years I took up the profession after my marriage. Ah, I understand. No, I am not a widower. Shall I explain? When I was a youth of 13, I prayed often to God for knowledge, and so was led to various people who taught me and to different books. I became so fascinated by study that I would sit up reading all day and far into the night. My parents arranged a marriage for me. A few days after we were married, my wife got angry with me and said, I have married a human book. On the 8th day, she ran away with the man who used to drive our carriage. Sudhir Babu pauses. I cannot help smiling at his wife's caustic comment, though her speedy elopement must have created a sensation in conservative India. But the ways of women are tortuous and beyond the compass of a man's mind. After a while, I recovered from the shock, he continues, and forgot her. All my emotions were blotted out. I went deeper than ever into the study of astrology and the divine mysteries. It is then that I took up my greatest study, the book of Brahmachinta. Perhaps you will tell me what that book is concerned with? The title can be translated as Divine Meditation, or as The Quest of Brahma, or even as God Knowledge. The entire work contains several thousand pages, but the part I study is only a section. It took me nearly 20 years to collect even that, because it exists only in scattered parts here and there. I have slowly obtained these different parts through agents in the various provinces of India. There are 12 chief divisions among its subjects and many subdivisions. The chief topics are philosophy, astrology, yoga, life after death, and other deep matters. Do you know if there is any English translation of the book? He shakes his head. I have never heard of one. Few, even are the Hindus, who know of the existence of the book. Hitherto, it has been jealously guarded and kept secret. It came originally from Tibet, where it is looked upon as very sacred and only chosen students were allowed to study it. When was it written? It was composed thousands of years ago by the sage Bhrigu, who lived so long ago that I cannot give you the date. It teaches a method of yoga which is quite different from all others which exist in India. You're interested in yoga, are you not? For answer, Sudhai Babu quietly produces the chart which he has constructed around my birth date and moves his pencil among the strange glyphs which represent planetary configurations and zodiacal signs. Your horoscope surprises me. It is out of the ordinary for a European and not even a common one for an Indian. It shows that you will have a great tendency to study yoga and that you will enjoy the favor of sages who will help you to delve deeply into the subject. Yet, you will not limit yourself to yoga alone, but become versed in other mystic philosophies. He pauses and looks at me straight in the eyes. I receive the subtle impression that he is about to make a statement which will be tantamount to a revelation of his inner life. There are two kinds of sages, those who selfishly keep their knowledge to themselves, and those who, after obtaining enlightenment, share it freely with others who are seeking for it. Your horoscope shows that you are almost at the gate of illumination, and therefore my words will not fall on deaf ears. I am ready to impart my knowledge to you. I am taken aback at this strange turn of affairs. I first come to Sudhai Babu to check up on the claims of Indian astrology. I come again to listen to his further defense of his basic postulate, and now he unexpectedly offers to become my teacher in yoga. If you will practice the methods of Brahmachinta, you will need no teacher, he continues. Your own soul will become your teacher. I suddenly realize my mistake and wonder whether he has read my thoughts. You take me by surprise, is all I can say. I have already instructed a few persons in this knowledge, but I have never regarded myself as their master, only as their brother or friend. So I do not undertake to become your teacher in the ordinary sense. The spirit of the sage Bhrigu will simply use this body and mind of mine to communicate his teachings to you. I do not understand how you can combine the profession of astrology with the teaching of a yoga system. His thin hands spread themselves upon the table. The explanation is this. I live in the world and serve it through my work, which happens to be astrology. Secondly, I refuse to be looked upon as a teacher of yoga, because in our Brahmachinta, the only teacher acknowledged is God. He is the only preceptor we acknowledge. He, as the universal soul, is in us and will teach us. Look on me as a brother if you wish, but do not look on me as a spiritual preceptor. Those who have a teacher are too apt to lean on him and to depend on him instead of on their own soul. And yet, you depend on astrology for guidance? I retort quickly. Instead of your own soul? You are not right. I never look at my own horoscope now. In fact, I tore it up many years ago. I express astonishment at this statement. He replies, I have found the light and do not need astrology to guide me, but those who still walk in darkness find it helpful. I have placed my life entirely in the Lord's hands. I carry that act to its proper conclusion by giving up all care about future or past. Whatever the Lord sends, that I accept as His will. I have given up my whole self, body, mind, actions, and feelings to the will of the Almighty. Suppose you are threatened with death by a murderous ruffian. Would you do nothing and accept that as God's will? When any danger arises, I know that I have only to pray and instantly to receive His protection. Prayer is necessary, but fear is not. I pray frequently and the Lord has marvelously protected me, yet I have been through great troubles. Through all of them, I was conscious of His help, and I trust Him fully under every event. One day you too will disregard the future and become indifferent to it. There will have to be a remarkable change in me before that happens, I observed Twilly. That change will surely come. Are you certain? Yes. You cannot escape your destiny. This spiritual rebirth is an event which comes from God, whether one looks for it or not. You say strange things, Sudhir Babu. The idea of deity is the unknown factor which enters into so many of my conversations in this land. The Hindus are essentially religious, and I am often tantalized by the familiar way in which they introduce mention of God. Is it possible for them to appreciate the viewpoint of a doubting Westerner who has surrendered simple faith for complex reason? I realize that it will be unavailing and suit no practical purpose to throw up this question of deity into argument with the astrologer. I have no taste for partaking of any theological diet which he will probably place before me, so I turn the subject back to less controversial ground. Let us talk of other matters, for God and I have never met. He looks at me fixedly, his peculiar black and white eyes searching my soul. The chart of your horoscope cannot be wrongly drawn, or I might keep back my knowledge from an unready mind. But the stars move without fault. What you are unable to grasp today will linger in your thoughts for a time and then return with a double force. I tell you again that I am ready to impart the way of Brahmachinta to you, and I am ready to learn it. Evening after evening, I visit the old stone house of the astrologer and receive my lessons in Brahmachinta. The pale lamplight throws flickering patterns upon his narrow face as he initiates me into the arcana of this primitive Tibetan yoga system. At no time does he adopt the attitude of spiritual superiority or egoistic tutorship. He is humility personified and usually prefaces his instruction with the phrase, "In this teaching of Brahmachinta, it is said." What is the supreme object, the final goal of this yoga of Brahmachinta? I ask him one evening. We seek the condition of sacred trance, for in that condition, man obtains perfect proof that he is a soul. Then it is that he frees his mind from his surroundings, objects fade away, and the outside world seems to disappear. He discovers the soul as a living, real being within himself. Its bliss, peace, and power overwhelm him. All he needs is a single experience of this kind to obtain the proof that there is a divine and undying life in himself. Never again can he forget it. A shed of doubt prompts my inquiry. Are you sure that all this is not a deep form of autosuggestion? A ghost of a smile curls around his lips. When a mother gives birth to a child, is it possible that she can doubt, even for a single moment, what is happening? And when she comes to look back on that experience, could she ever think that it was only an autosuggestion? And when she watches her child grow up beside her year after year, can she hesitate at any time and disbelieve in its existence? In the same way, the labor of spiritual rebirth comes as such a tremendous event in one's life that it cannot be forgotten. It changes everything for one. When one enters into the sacred trance, a kind of vacuum is created within the mind. God, or as you do not seem to care for that word, the soul, the higher power, shall I say, enters and fills that vacuum. When that happens, it is impossible to avoid becoming filled with intense happiness. One also feels a great love for the whole of creation. The body will appear to be an observer, to be not only in a trance, but apparently dead, for all breathing stops when the deepest point is attained. Is that not dangerous? No. The trance is attained in complete solitude, or a friend may be permitted to watch over one. I frequently enter into the sacred trance and can always emerge from it whenever I wish. I usually stay in it for 2 or 3 hours and fix the time of its ending beforehand. It is a wonderful experience because what you see as the universe, I see again within myself. That is why I say that all you need to learn can be learned from your own soul. After I have communicated the complete yoga of Brahmachinta to you, no master will be necessary. You will need no outside guidance. You have never had a teacher yourself? None. I have never looked for one since I discovered the secrets of Brahmachinta. Nevertheless, some great masters have come to me from time to time. This has happened when I have entered the sacred trance and become conscious in the inner world. These great sages have appeared before me in their psychic forms and placed their hands on my head in blessing. Therefore, I say again, trust the guidance of your own soul, and teachers will come unbidden to you in the inner world. For the next 2 minutes, there is a brooding silence. The other man seems to be caught up in a cloud of thoughts. Then, very quietly, very humbly, the strange tutor says, "Once, during the sacred trance, I saw Jesus." "You mystify me," I exclaim. But he does not hasten to explain. Instead, he suddenly rolls the whites of his eyes upwards in a most alarming manner. There is another minute of intense silence, and only when he brings his eyes back to their normal appearance am I reassured. When he addresses me again, a faintly enigmatical smile hovers once more around his lips. Such is the greatness of this sacred trance that death cannot catch a man while he is in it. There are some yogis on the Tibetan side of the Himalayas who have practiced to perfection this part of Brahmachinta. Because it pleases them to do so, they have secluded themselves in mountain caves, where they have entered the profoundest degree of the most sacred trance. In that condition, the pulse stops, the heart no longer beats, and the blood does not flow through the unmoving body. Anyone finding them would think that they are dead. Do not imagine that they have gone into a kind of sleep, because they are as fully conscious as you or I. They have entered the inner world where they live higher lives. Their minds have become released from the limits set by the body, and they discover the whole universe within themselves. One day, they will come out of their trance, but then they will be many hundreds of years old. So once again, I hear this incredible tradition of perennial human life. Apparently, it will follow my feet wherever I go under this eastern sun. But shall I ever track down one of those legendary immortals and behold him face to face? And will the West ever discover and accept as a scientific and psychological contribution this ancient magic cradled in the bleak climate of Tibet? Who knows? My last lesson in the fantastic doctrines of the Yoga of Brahmachinta comes to an end. I persuade the sedentary astrologer to venture out of his house, which he rarely leaves, and give his limbs a little exercise. We wander through narrow alleys in an effort to avoid the packed bazaars which bar our way to the river. With all its ancient squalor and unhygienic overcrowding, Banaras nevertheless presents a variety of colorful sights to the man who wanders its streets afoot. It is afternoon, and my companion carries an open, flat parasol on his shoulder so as to keep off the sun's rays. His frail figure and very languid movements do not conduce to quick progress, and I change our route in order to shorten our journey. We pass into the street of the brass workers. The air rings with the hammers of bearded craftsmen and their products. Shining brazen vessels gleam in the sunlight. Here, too, are multitudes of little brass images, earthly representations of the chief gods in the Hindu pantheon. An old man crouches in the shade by the roadside in another street. He looks up at me with feeble eyes and pathetic face. His fare removed, he begs for alms. We drift through the street of the merchants of grain, where little wooden platforms exhibit piles of red and golden grains. The shopkeepers sit on folded legs or squat on haunch and heel beside their goods. They throw a few glances at the odd couple that passes by, and then resume their patient waiting for customers. Odors mingle indiscriminately in the other streets. As we approach the river, We walk right into a region which seems to be a hunting ground for those who seek alms. Lean beggars drag themselves along the dusty road. One of them comes near me and looks inquiringly into my eyes. He possesses a face of unspeakable melancholy. My heart is moved embarrassingly. Further on, I nearly stumble over a fleshless old woman whose body is a bunch of hanging skin and protruding bones. She too glances into my eyes. There is no reproach, only dull acceptance. I bring out my purse. Immediately she becomes an animated creature once again. She extends a skinny arm and takes the proffered coins. I tremble at my own good fortune in having plenty of food, good clothes, proper shelter, and other desirable things. When I think of the haunting eyes of those unfortunate wretches, I feel guilty. By what right do I enjoy the possession of so many rupees, so many annas, when those poor beggars own nothing more than rags? Suppose, by some accident of birth or fluke of fate, I had been born in the place of one of them? I play for a while with this ghastly thought, but horror eventually causes me to send it into oblivion. What is the meaning of this mystery of chance which, by the mere fortune of birth, puts one man in dirt-stained rags upon this road and another in silken robes in yonder riverside palace? Life is truly a dark enigma. I cannot comprehend it. "Let us sit down here," says the astrologer, when we reach the Ganges. We sit in the shade and look down the river upon the stretch of broad stone steps, rambling terraces and jutting platforms. Little groups of pilgrims are constantly coming and going. The shapely forms of two slender minarets soar gracefully into the pearly sky to a height of nearly 300 feet. They mark the charming mosques of Aurangzeb, the Mohammedan anachronism in this most Hindu of Hindu cities. But the astrologer has noted my sad preoccupation with beggars, for he turns his sallow face towards me and says, "India is a poor country." His voice is somewhat apologetic. "Its people have been sunk in inertia. The English race possesses some fine points and I believe that God brought them to our country for its benefit. Before they came, life was unsafe. Law and justice were often set aside. It is my hope that the English will not leave India. We need their help, but it should be given in friendship now and not by force. However, the destiny of both nations must fulfill itself." "Ah, your fatalism returns again." He ignores my comment and falls into silence. At length he asks, "How can the two peoples avoid God's will? Day is ever followed by night, and night is ever followed by day. So is it with the history of nations. Great changes brood over the world. India has been sunk in sloth and inertia, but she will change until she becomes filled with desires and ambitions which ever precede activity. Europe burns with practical activities, but the strength of its materialism will pass away and it will turn its face towards higher ideals. It will seek out the inner things, and the same will happen to America." I listen in silence. "For this reason, the philosophic and spiritual teachings of our land will travel towards the west like a wave of the ocean." He continues gravely. "Scholars have already translated some of our Sanskrit manuscripts and sacred books into Western languages, but many texts are hidden away in cave libraries in out-of-the-way parts of India, Nepal, and Tibet. Those, too, must eventually be made known to the world. The time will come before long when the ancient philosophies and inner knowledge of India shall unite with the practical sciences of the West. The secrecy of past times must give way to the needs of this century. I am glad all this will happen." I stare into the greenish water of the Ganges. The river is so strangely tranquil that it seems hardly to flow. Its surface shimmers in the sunlight. He addresses me yet again. "The destiny of each race of people must be realized, just as the destiny of every person must be fulfilled. The Lord is omnipotent. Men and nations cannot escape from their self-earned fate. but they must be protected throughout their troubles and even saved from great dangers. And how does one obtain such protection? By prayer, by keeping a childlike nature when one turns towards the Almighty, and by remembering Him not on one's lips but in one's heart, especially before one begins any action. In happy days, try to enjoy them as a blessing of God, and in troubles, try to think that it is very much like a medicine to heal your inner disease. Fear Him not, as He is all merciful. You do not believe that God is remote from this world, then? No. God is a spirit which is hidden in people and throughout the universe. If you see any beauty in nature, a beautiful landscape for instance, do not worship it for its own sake, but remember that it is beautiful because of the deity present in it. See the divinity in objects and people, and do not be so captivated by outer forms that you forget the inner spirit which gives them life. You mingle your doctrines of faith, religion, and astrology in a peculiar manner, Sudhai Babu. He gazes solemnly at me. Why so? These doctrines are not of my creation. They have descended to us from the most distant ages of the past. The tremendous power of destiny, the worship of our Creator, and the lore of planetary influences were known to the earliest peoples. They were not such savages as you Westerners imagine. But have I not prophesied? The West will rediscover before this century closes how real are these invisible forces which enter into the lives of all men. It will be extremely hard for the West to give up its inborn notion that a man's will is free to make or mar his own life. Whatever happens, he is by his will, and whatever seems like free will really works by His power. The Almighty returns to men the good or evil fruits of their thoughts and deeds in earlier bodies. It is best to accept His will, but one will not tremble under sorrows if one looks to Him for the strength to endure them. Let us hope that you are right, for the sake of those unfortunate beggars whom we just have encountered. That is the only answer I can make, he rejoins shortly. If you would follow the path into your own soul, the way of Brahmachinta which I have shown you, these problems would clear themselves. I realize that he has now conducted me to the limits of his argumentative possibilities, and that I must find my own way henceforth. One of my coat pockets hides a fateful telegram that bids me whisk away into a train out of Benares. In another pocket there reposes a folding Kodak. I ask the astrologer to pose for his photograph. He politely declines. I press him more insistently. But why? He remonstrates. My ugly face and shabby clothes? Please, your photograph will remind me of you in later years when I may be in distant lands. The best reminder, he replies gently, will be holy thoughts and unselfish deeds. I yield to his objection reluctantly, and the camera disappears again into my pocket. When he rises to return at last, and I begin to follow him, I discover close by a seated figure who has taken shelter from the terrific sun under a huge round bamboo umbrella. His face is wrapped in meditation, and I perceive by the ochre color of his robe that he is a holy man belonging to a superior order. We go a little way and find a cow, possibly a member of the sacred variety which abounds in Benares, sleeping in that distant posture familiar to its kind. It lies across our tracks with legs doubled back under its abdomen. We reach the shop of a money changer, where I hail a carriage, and then our ways part. I indulge in an orgy of travelling during the next few days. I spend my nights in wayside rest houses put up by a paternal government for travelling officials and other persons who have to journey into the interior. One of these rest houses possesses no amenities worth mentioning, but I discover that it has a plentiful population of ants. After 2 hours' slow torture and vain efforts to repel their attacks, I decide to leave the bed and spend the night in a chair. Time trickles by unpleasantly until my thoughts let go of their surroundings and fasten themselves upon the fatalistic philosophy of the Benares astrologer. Simultaneously, I remember the wretched beggars who dragged their hungry bodies along the road. Life does not let them live and does not let them die. The wealthy Marwari moneylender may pass them in his ornate, comfortably sprung carriage, but they accept him, as they accept their misery, with a complete submission to the will of God. In this land of a burning sky, even the pitiful leper seems content with his lot. Such is the narcotic fatalism which creeps into the bones of so many Indians. I realize how vain it is for the Occidental partisan of free will to argue with the Oriental advocate of an all-powerful destiny. To the latter, there is but one side to the problem, the side which unquestionably accepts the dogma that there is no problem. Fate rules his roost, and there is nothing more to be said. What self-reliant Westerner likes to hear that we are but mere marionettes, which dangle from the strings of fate, and which move up and down or from right to left at the bidding of an unseen hand? I remember that remarkable outburst of Napoleon before his army's brilliant dash across the Alps. Impossible? There is no such word in my dictionary. But I have studied and restudied the fascinating records of Napoleon's entire life, and memory brings back to me strange lines which he wrote down at St. Helena, where his colossal brain raced again and again over the past. I was always a fatalist. What is written in the heavens is written. My star grew dim. I felt the reins slip from my hands, and yet I could do nothing. The man who held such paradoxical, contradictory beliefs could not have solved the mystery, and one doubts whether anyone has ever completely solved it. It may be that ever since the brain of man commenced to function, this ancient problem has been discussed by people all the way from the North Pole to the South. The cocksure, as usual, have settled it to their satisfaction. The philosophical still enter up the account of pros and cons, but hesitate to strike a balance. I have not forgotten the astrologer's surprisingly correct interpretation of my horoscope. At odd moments, I have mused over it, until I wonder whether some of his oriental fatalistic foolishness has crept into my head. Whenever I have remembered how this man of modest assumptions read my past, how he recalled the fluttering phenomena of bygone events back to temporary existence, I hesitate and feel tempted to collect material for a fat treatise upon this hoary problem of fate and free will. But I know that it will be a useless task to let my pen play with the thought of destiny, and that I may probably finish up in the same abysmal darkness with which I begin. For the problems of astrology will need to be brought in, and my task will become complicated beyond my power. Yet, such are the gigantic strikes of modern invention, that the day when we shall take Cook's tours to the distant planets may not be far off. It will then be possible to discover whether the starry frame possesses any real significance in our lives. Meanwhile, one may test the powers of an astrologer or two, bearing in mind Sudais Babu's warnings about the fallibility and about the fragmentary nature of that portion of astrology which has been revealed to the world. And yet, even assuming and admitting that in some strange four-dimensional manner the future already exists, is it desirable to learn those secrets of personal destiny which are curtained from one's eyes? On this questioning note, my musings come to a dead end and sleep overtakes me. A few days later, I am in a town several hundred miles away from Benares when the news comes of startling riots in the larger city. It is the unpleasant story of Hindu-Muslim strife, which usually begins in a petty way, but is used by ruffians who want a pseudo-religious pretext for their looting, maiming, and murdering. A reign of terror rules the city for several days. The lamentable period brings the usual tale of broken heads, tortured bodies, and indiscriminate slaying. I feel concerned for the astrologer's safety, but it is impossible to get in touch with him. The postmen are too scared to venture into the streets, and no private letter or telegram can be delivered. I am compelled to wait till King Mob is dethroned in Benares, and then dispatch one of the first wires which penetrate the unhappy city. Back comes a simple letter of thanks in which the astrologer ascribes his safety to the protection of the Almighty. And upon the reverse side of the paper, he has inscribed 10 rules of practice of the yoga of Brahmachinta. End chapter 12.